Hey guys, so let's talk about something really cool and esoteric for a change. The light behind me, by the way, does not mean I'm a saint with a halo. It's just a light. So if you've ever thought so, I'm sorry to disavow you of the idea. But here comes the topic. Ready? Continuing on with the Other Worlds theme and series. Translation and chess. And I have a pillow to prove the point. Too bad it's not a real chessboard. Okay, there was a beautiful book by Garry Kasparov, and it was called How Life Imitates Chess. Not how chess imitates life, but how life imitates chess. And he drew a lot of analogies and parallels, and chess is very, very profound and versatile, and there are a lot of analogies you can draw. So let's try it. One of my favorite analogies and a very general one is that, translation is like a standard classical game of chess where you get 2 hours or more because you have a lot of time to think and consult dictionaries, and you're not rushed for time, nor do you have infinite time. Then there is rapid chess or speed chess, which usually is between 10, 15, 20 minutes, and that's like consecutive interpreting, where you do have time to think sometimes, especially if the speaker is going on for a long time, but it's not infinite by any means, and you can easily run out of time. And then of course there's blitz chess, which is 5 minutes or less, and that's like, you got it, simultaneous. By the way, I hate looking at the phone. It gives me a reflection in my eyes, so forgive me if I look way out there at the horizons and ponder the world of translation in chess. Okay, so there are these different styles, and they all differ greatly, and sometimes what matters in blitz is not what matters in classical chess. Same with translation and interpreting, but they all help one another, I think. And the greatest of greats in chess, like Kasparov and Magnus Carlsen, they were awesome in blitz and in classical chess. So that is analogy number one. Do both, because both complement each other. Okay, there is a concept in chess called a gambit. I think it comes from Italian gamba, to trap with the foot or leg or something of the sort. And it means where you sacrifice material advantage like a pawn to gain a positional advantage. And sometimes it makes sense in chess to do so at the beginning of the game. So and then there's just a sacrifice altogether, not necessarily at the beginning, which I love, by the way. And in translation and interpreting, what would this be like? Well, sometimes in poetic translation, you have to sacrifice a unit of meaning, to get in the rhyme or the rhythm, or to make it more beautiful. Sometimes in more precise styles of translation, you have to sacrifice style or register. You shouldn't have to, but come on, we live in the real world, so it happens. So that sacrifice is sometimes warranted and sometimes not, and the best chess players and the best interpreters and translators and linguists know when to do it and when not to do it. Interesting analogy. When I used to play against my grandfather, or with my grandfather, depending on your viewpoint, he would often taunt me and say "Pishkayetstvo opasnaya болезнь," which translates from Russian something like "pawn gluttony is a dangerous disease," meaning you can get very, very carried away with devouring the opponent's pawns and, lose your positional advantage and even miss the fact that your important piece is about to get eaten, or that you're going to miss a checkmate or something of the sort. And what would that be like in linguistics and translation? Well, I think that it equates most closely to literalism. When people think so hard about words and every single word and getting that word in there and sticking to the grammatical structure that, they miss the forest for the trees. They miss the meaning, they miss the concept for the words. And it's very, very common. Like, I had this colleague who would stick very closely to the grammatical structure of the text, and it's just not necessary. Or try to translate every single word when it's just not necessary. Sometimes a word translates as 2 words. Sometimes 2 words translate as 1 word, and we're talking about concepts and meanings, not words, just whatever. I'm looking at a box of strawberries right now. So we have a word in Russian, земляnika, which I think would be the best and the closest translation in English would be wild strawberry. So that's 1 word becoming 2 words because there's just not an exact term. Or I love to give this example from Russian, which is zlopamyatny, and sometimes you can translate as vengeful, sometimes spiteful, but it literally means remembering evil. And there's not a one direct translation in English. So I'm not sure if these were perfect examples, but whatever. Okay, context. And again, I'm jumping on my hobby horse, chess horse. Context is everything. So let's say you're playing Blitz and your opponent has 10 seconds left. So I'm just going to play for time and try to make them think hard and lose on time. I don't even care if I win positionally or not. I'm just going to play for time. What would that be like in translation and interpreting? When you're not ever just playing for time, because you do want it to be precise. Playing for time would be like not caring about precision, not caring about winning, and just caring about superficial things. But there is perhaps something similar. Like we've talked about this with my colleagues. Let's say that you're interpreting for specialists. It's very, very technical, and you somehow just don't know the subject as well as they do, which you should, but it happens. Well, in that case, and I think there's consensus among professionals, is you just want to keep grammatical structure. You want to keep the sentence and language structure there, and they will fill in the specialized words and so forth. So that is very different than some other contexts. So whether or not this is the ideal example, context matters. What style of chess is it, and where in the game are you? Are you in the Endspiel, endgame, Mittelspiel, middle game, or in the debut, or where in the world are you? Because your strategy is also going to differ. All right, chess can be grueling, just like interpreting especially can be. And if you've ever worked, overtime in interpreting, you know that I'm speaking sooth. So, just like chess players, interpreters need to train not only their mind, but also their physical body, right? The Romans used to say, mens sana in corpore sano, in a healthy body, a healthy mind, which for whatever reason in Russian was translated to as v zdarovom tele zdarovy duch, spirit, not mind. But I think the Roman mens could mean both soul and mind, although I think it's more closely translates as mind, but whatever, I'm getting carried away. The spirit also lives in the body sometimes. Now I'm really getting carried away. We're getting very philosophical here. So, but you get my point, right? So you have to train the body, and it was actually eye-opening to me when I read, I think in an article by Kasparov, that chess players have to train the body as well. Okay, so that's an important point. You have to know your basics. That's the next point. Is, for example, my current chessmate, nice pun, chessmate, is a really cool guy. His name is Vicente. But in one game, about 2 days back or 3 days back, he was losing on time, and he could easily checkmate me with a queen and a rook, or maybe it was 2 rooks, and he just somehow got flustered, and he didn't make it. But any really, he's good, he's clever, but any really experienced chess player knows, like the palm of their hand, how to checkmate with 2 rooks or a rook and a queen, and they wouldn't get flustered, not even when they have 10 seconds left. And Vicente didn't win because he lost on time. So but he beat me many times, so I'll credit him. And yeah, this should not happen, but it could happen. Now I'm thinking if I should have said that, because it's almost like a kid's checkmate to checkmate with 2 rooks, but it was an unusual position where pawns were interspersed between the king and the rooks. So anyway, it wasn't as trivial as you might think. But anyway, it was just an example. And the example is, if you don't know your linguistic basics, and if you have to think, should I use present perfect or past perfect, or should I use continuous or simple, or should I, do this or that, or if you're thinking about grammar or syntax, then you're just not thinking about the interpreting itself, right? And you might lose your train of thought conceptually. So know your basics. And next point, which is sort of like a corollary, know the traps. In chess, there are a lot of traps as well, right? Like there's something called a pin, where a piece can't move because it would open up a check, or it would endanger a more important piece like a queen. And there are forks where you're attacking 2 pieces at the same time. And in translation interpreting, this would be like false friends, or not knowing that a word has 2 definitions. For example, very curious, The English word peruse can mean study profoundly or study superficially. Or the words ravel and unravel can mean the same thing. And, we're not going to belabor the point here. We're not talking about linguistic traps, but you have to know the traps and you have to know the basics. Okay, which piece is most important? Well, that kind of relates back to context. It depends where in the game you are. And sometimes it's the pawn, and sometimes it's the queen, and sometimes it's the bishop. And, for example, rooks in the beginning of the game, they don't do much. But in middle game or an end game, they can play a crucial role. Or I remember one chess puzzle where, a pawn advances to the last line and everybody always wants to pick a queen, but if you pick a queen, it's either a tie or a loss, and it's only a win if you pick a knight. So it really depends. Just like word choice depends, just like style of interpreting and mode of interpreting, it all depends. All right, let's move on. This is just an interesting anecdote. If you remember the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, and if you haven't seen it, I highly, highly recommend it, even if you're not a chess player or a kid, because it's a kid's chess movie, but it's an incredible film. And there is a moment when two different styles clash, because this kid has two trainers, and one is a street African-American player, and another is this prim, proper white master. And there's one point in the game when he's thinking about sacrificing the queen, and it's obvious to both masters, both of his mentors, he's thinking about it, and the white guy's like, don't. And the black guy's like, do. And eventually he opts for sacrificing the queen and he wins. So in that context, with his style, it was the right move. But what does that tell you? First of all, it might not have been the right move in a different context, or for a less risky player who didn't own that move. So there are different styles of interpreting. And it is not necessarily true that one is more proper than the other, right? Like I know this high caliber interpreter whom I truly respect, and he openly admits that, throughout my career, I've always opted for interpreting very close semantically to the original. Me, I tend to be more of a rule breaker, and it doesn't mean I take liberties. You have to have that school of precision, which, by the way, chord interpreting is very good for. But conceptually, I will take liberties if I don't think that I'm perverting, or altering the concept. So styles are important, and you have to own your style. And every grandmaster had a very different style. Like Mikhail Botvinnik was a very calculating chess player, whereas Mikhail Tal, both of them Soviets, were Tal was very stormy, very, I think, risky. Like it was very, very flamboyant. And by the way, a curious tidbit is that Bobby Fischer and Mikhail Tal were tied in their record. Anyway, speaking of Fischer and of others, confidence and even arrogance, modest arrogance or arrogant confidence, it's not bad, it's good. Like I remember seeing this interview with Bobby Fischer, where he tells his American interviewer, like these Soviets, there's just nobody really good among them. He's speaking about the Soviet school of chess, like the best in the world. And granted, he was going up against Boris Spassky, which I'm sure was great, but I don't think was the best. I think Tal and Kasparov and whatever were better. But still, that was Fischer's attitude, I'm just the best. And that's kind of how you want to be as a translator and interpreter. Whatever, I'm the best Italian, English, Italian, Spanish, French, English translator, interpreter out there, because why wouldn't you even think that? If you don't think that, then I think there's something wrong with your linguistic game. Sorry to put it bluntly, but that's just my point. But you can use it to your advantage. If you don't think that, like, go through your linguistic game, quote unquote, and see where possibly you're faltering, because your confidence should be up there. And in fact, sometimes it's that confidence and that demeanor which wins the game. I forgot to talk about demeanor when I was talking about how grueling it is. So I think very often, especially in interpreting and in chess, it is not just who's the best chess player, it's that not necessarily intimidation tactic, but envision these two guys or two gals at the chessboard, and it's the one who has the better composure who often wins. It's not always the best chess player technically. And same with interpreting, you have to be able to keep your nonchalance and your poise and your demeanor, especially if you're being challenged, and especially if somebody's quote unquote playing against you, although that shouldn't be the case. Okay, good. We spoke about the basics, but kind of to contradict myself, You do want to know your basics, but you don't have to be like a rule nerd or a grammarian. Like, for example, I was watching one game and one interview with Magnus Carlsen, who I believe is the highest ranked chess player today in the world. And he did not know one very simple chess rule that sometimes kids know, basically, which is the box rule for whether or not the king is gonna catch the pawn advancing to the final row. And he didn't know that rule. He probably intuitively knew it, but he did not know that rule. But he's still the best chess player arguably out there, or even in history, although I think that Kasparov and he in their respective primes would be very, very close, but who knows. By the way, Magnus Carlsen learned from Kasparov, just like Kasparov learned from his predecessors. And that humbleness goes very closely hand in glove, with the arrogance. But Magnus Carlsen has an incredible visual concept, this vision of the board, and yet, the fact that he doesn't know one single rule does not mean he's bad. Just like if you don't know some grammatical rule does not make you a bad interpreter, but it's not an excuse for not knowing the basics. Kind of an oxymoron, but not really. Okay, we talked about different styles, different grandmasters develop your style in interpreting. I know my style, but I can also shift styles, right? And it depends whom you're playing against, or in our field, what the context is. Like, for example, I tend to opt for longer segments because I can translate or interpret, more conceptually. I'm talking about interpreting. And I tend to, like I already told you, interpret very conceptually. But if I'm in unknown, uncharted waters, and if I don't know my terminology very well, or if there's a lot of factual information, I'm gonna cut it down big time and maybe even go sentence by sentence. So you have to have your own unique style, but also be able to vary styles. All right, and I think I'm going to conclude with one tip that I learned from Garry Kasparov. It's a presentation he gave in Switzerland, and you should look it up. You can find it on YouTube. It's something like Chess and Intuition, Kasparov, Switzerland. But he says that in the greatest, most heated moments, most passionate moments, I trusted my intuition and I found the best move. And later, when I had all the time to calculate, I couldn't find that same or a better move. And basically the point he makes is, no matter how calculating and analytical chess is, intuition is a key player, and sometimes even more important. Trust your gut. That's the key point that he makes. And so in interpreting or in translation, trust your gut, because it's happened to me that I've picked a word, and even in translation, when you have all the time to think, and then I second guessed myself and I looked for synonyms and I did this and that and the other thing, and I came back to my original choice because it was the best choice. And in interpreting, you just don't even have that time, so trust your gut and roll with it. And that's probably the best advice out there in any field. So, my dear friends, translators and interpreters, I think we're gonna wrap up. I need something very Mexican for my late supper. But the point is, learn to play chess if you don't know how, or if you haven't played in a while, go and play. But mainly think about these different tips and treat translation and interpreting like a fun and fine game, a game of chess or any other analogy, and be the darnest, bestest chess player, translation, interpreting player you can be, and make it fun and make it thrilling. And the next time that you're playing this beautiful game of translation and interpreting, think of these tips, think of me, write me, and I will have loved to know that I have inspired you. See ya.